Hi, welcome to the bathtub, where when you hear this sound effect, that's the Gonzaga, I don't know, Gonzaga College, bunch of kids shouting they're number one. Because they're number one. And number one in the bathtub means you win the absolute achievement, the apex of literary specialness, which is the All Bathtub Hall of Fame Award. This is the trophy. It's the award itself is as illustrious as this depicts it to be. I don't know what that means. And it was built by the Pismo Beach Prop Department over Christmas. Isn't that wonderful? They spent a lot of time on this. It's one of Dodo's bathtubs with packing tape, taped to our cheap plastic toy. So in the future, so for all bathtub Hall of Famers, many of whom are dead, and whose families miss them, and we all miss everybody who was great writers, and this they can look at this and it'll warm their heart cockles, their heart's cockles. Look at that. Isn't that beautiful? We don't send it to anybody because we only have one of them, but they get a look at it on this show. There you go. And this one is going to Michael Moorcock. We've been saying for a while we kind of have to give him an All Bathtub Hall of Fame. Most of our All Bathtub Hall of Famers are kind of no-brainers. You know, you kind of just got to give it to them because so many people have read them in the bathtub, including myself. I've got a million pillows here. I can't get myself comfortable in this chair. And I'll stop showing you this because it makes people jealous. They say, "Oh, why don't I have one of those?" But I don't know why. I don't know why you don't have one. We're talking about Michael Moorcock. He's bath-tabulous. He's bath-tastic. I haven't read a lot of Mike Moorcock over the years. Often, I read him off and on. I read a lot of him like many big readers did when I was a kid, when I was 14 or 15. I think I read several of his books. The one I remember, the one that first kind of got to me, and I probably didn't put it out. The Knight of Swords. There it is. The Knight of Swords. Okay, I have a bunch more of these things. The Knight of Swords was one of his Quorum series of kind of heroic. They call them heroic fantasy, but Moorcock's stuff is just completely psychedelic craziness fantasy. I don't know what it is. And I love this book, and I read it as 14 or 15 in like one sitting. And when I was teaching, when I was teaching in United Kingdom, I first moved to London to teach. Well, I was living in London, but I had a teaching job out at Kingston, and we had some writers in there who liked fantasy, and so I thought, well, let's put this in there. I put this as one of the few fantasy, kind of contemporary fantasies that I had read, and I reread it again as an old fart professor, and it was just as much fun. The whole series is terrific. They're really weird, really strange. There's 6 of them, and I like that one. Chronicles of Quorum is the second set of. There's the Knight of Swords, the Queen of Swords, and then there's the Sword of Swords, or the King of Swords, or the Somebody of Swords. Then there's a sequel of another 3 trilogies, another trilogy: the Bull and the Spear, the Oak and the Ram, the Sword and the Stallion. I can't really describe Moorcock's heroic fantasies. They start off when he starts off. He started off as a really young writer, and he must have been a teenager. Like a lot of writers, you become a big reader, you love reading, and you immediately want to do for other people what you get out of books. And he was big into. You could tell he loved lots of fantasy, Edgar Rice Burroughs, and adventure stories. H. Rider Haggard, you can sort of see the H. Rider Haggard in him, and he loved all these kind of adventure books. And he wrote books when he was a teenager, and he was actually an editor, even before he was kind of this very important editor at New Worlds, when he took over New Worlds in the 60s. And he was writing all sorts of stuff. So he wrote these heroic fantasies. That's probably the first ones I remember well. And they still hold up. What's interesting about the All Bathtub, I think, and this is sort of the unspoken belief of the All Bathtub Hall of Fame, is that the writers tend to be someone you can read when you're a kid who don't look stupid when you get older. A lot of the stuff we like when we were kids is really awful, really terrible stuff. But a lot of the stuff we read as kids, Charles Schultz or Shirley Jackson, writers who you were a kid and you really loved them, and then you get older and they're still great. And I think that's sort of true of Moorcock. So the other book I read when I was a kid was The Ice Schooner. I want to reread this. I read this when I was 14 or 15. And it's some sort of futuristic the world's fallen into an ice age or something. But people are driving these boats across the ice. I remember it pretty vividly. It's just a book I couldn't put down. Aren't those beautiful? Those are really beautiful. These are the old Berkeley editions. Look at these. I mean, I haven't even read The Twilight Man. Look at this. I mean, can you see that? The Time Dweller. I can't remember which ones I've read. Look at these incredible books. Anyway, he wrote lots and lots of books, dozens and dozens and dozens of books. And I started in the past few years. I reread a few of them when I went back to read some of the stuff I read when I was a kid. His most famous series would be probably the History of the Rune Staff, which sounds like it's a Tolkien ripoff, but it's not. His books are not all like Tolkien. They're very different, much more gruesome, much more kind of nihilistic. They're really nihilistic fantasy worlds, and everyone's being slaughtered, and there's no rhyme or reason. And there's two sets of gods, as I recall, in some of the books, the Elric books maybe. We have gods of chaos and gods of order, and they're both evil. They're both horrible. They do nothing but destruction. Anyway, the Runestaff books, I reread these over the past 5 or 6 years and really enjoyed them. And they're very strange, just future kind of science fantasy adventure books. And again, I can't quite describe them. I think The Jewel in the Skull is the first one, and the second one's The Mad God's Amulet. And I won't go much further into them, except I think they're really worth reading. Look at their cool old DAW. There's a lot of editions of these. One of the things to remember about Moorcock is he wrote a lot of stuff for mags for the sort of dying science fiction and fantasy magazines in England in the 60s when he was young. And he wrote lots of novelettes and novellas, and I think that his most famous character are the ones I'm not as wild about, which are the Elric books. Okay, here's the first one, Elric of Melniboné or something. I think he's got all sorts of problems. He's albino, and he's got some horrible disease, so he's dying. And then he gets this sword that keeps him alive because it's evil and it kills people and sucks their souls down or something like that. Anyway, they're entertaining. They're mainly novellas. Like there have been novelettes and novellas that he kind of stitched together into novels. And in my old age, I've been trying to read my way through these, and I'm enjoying them. They're fun to read, but they're just a little too programmatic. They don't have the kind of richness and the structure of some of these later fantasy novels he does. He was greatly influenced by a lot of different writers. I mentioned Poul Anderson a while back. Poul Anderson wrote that book, The Broken Sword, and I'm pretty sure it's been confirmed to me, I believe, by the Outlaw Bookseller. I got to say a few words here about the Outlaw Bookseller. He's in Bath. He's got to be cool, right? He lives in Bath, England. He's started a whole new series. He's doing these really beautifully produced talks on books, and he takes you on walks around. He took you on a walk around his area and some of the literary sites. And he's done a lot of pieces about Moorcock, and he knows Moorcock's work much better than I do. And I'm going to put a link to Stephen Andrews. I'm going to put a link to his one of his pieces at his YouTube channel, and I think you'll enjoy them. Anyway, the Poul Anderson books seem to have been influenced on him. The Worm Ouroboros. I was in the middle of reading Moorcock over Christmas, and I decided to go back to read this book because I'm pretty sure I've read Moorcock talk about him, and I've known other people talk about E.R. Edison as this kind of alternative to Tolkien. An alternative in the sense that it's kind of a much more irrational world. There's a lot more sex in this book and in the other ones, and it's a kind of crazy book. I liked parts of it a lot, and I didn't like other parts. Mervyn Peake is another guy you could sort of see influencing some of Moorcock's writing. Anyway, I found this quite interesting. I wasn't wild about it, and I don't know if I'm going to read the sequels to it, but I did find parts of it. Parts of it are very kind of beautifully. It's written in this kind of archaic language. Anyway, I just thought I'd throw that in, because Moorcock is influenced by a lot of interesting writers who are kind of the alternatives to the Christian fantasists that are so popular in England. Anyway, I don't want to talk too much more. He's very well known also for the Jerry Cornelius books. I read some of these as a kid, and I liked them. I don't remember them very well. I got a kick out of them. There's an introduction to this one by my old friend John Clute. Anyway, that's cool. That's like 3 or 4 volumes in one paperback. Isn't that a cool trade paperback? And he also did, I remember reading these because there's a whole bunch of these, there's a series of these at the end of time. And the Alien Heat, I believe, was the first. Dances at the End of Time. And these are like in some sort of far future world. The other writer who's clearly an influence, 2 writers who were big influences on Moorcock, who you might like if you like him. One's Jack Vance. Jack Vance kind of has to go into the All-Bathtub Hall of Fame soon. Jack Vance is weird, futuristic societies, which are just, they're kind of hard to describe in just a few sentences, but he's a wonderful writer. And there's Jack Vance and Fritz Leiber. Fritz Leiber's heroic fantasies, where you've kind of got these kind of dark landscapes, and it's kind of a nightmarish world in a way. Remind me a lot of Moorcock. Anyway, in Alien Heat, this is a far future thing. It's kind of like a decadence. The fin de siècle, British writers like Wilde is the most famous of the whole group, and Dowson and so forth. Anyway, that whole late 19th century writers and poets, William Morris and so forth. Anyway, it kind of has a kind of futuristic vision of that. And it's kind of a pretty well written book, as I recall. And then, of course, he's also well known. Moorcock, deservedly well known for he edited New Worlds, Best of New Worlds. A lot of writers who were good writers and would have done well anyway, kind of got a lot of opportunities to just do what the hell they wanted. And so you have people in there like Hilary Bailey and Christopher Priest and M. John Harrison, J.G. Ballard. Ballard was always going to be a big writer, but he was allowed to sort of play and try new things. Tom Dish, our old friend Tom Dish. Here's the last one I haven't talked about. Behold the Man's one of his most famous books. It's about a guy who goes back in time to see Jesus and see Jesus be crucified. It's a dark book, but it's not anti-Christian, though it's not pro-Christian either. I haven't read this in a long time. Anyway, there's so many Moorcock books. We could talk about them for ages, and we'll do some more reading because I'm reading through all sorts of different things in his work. I'm going to finish reading that whole series of the Elric books, I think, over the next year or two, because I'm getting into the late ones now. And there's a couple interesting late ones, and he's actually continued the series, I guess. Okay, Michael Moorcock, thank you. You're alive. You're alive to see this. I'm going to put a link to Stephen Andrews' wonderful website. He's done a lot of talks. We haven't even talked about the really interesting Moorcock novels, such as Mother London, which is one of my favorite books about London, and the Colonel Pyatt books, the first of which I read, Byzantium Endures, years ago. And we really should do a whole episode on Byzantium Endures, because I think Moorcock's fascination with this liar, Colonel Pyatt, is basically, he's Jewish anti-Semite. He's a bastard. He's a creepy, horrific person who you would see running governments today, lies constantly, and is charming, and tells charming stories while he's constantly lying. And I've only read the first of the series. I found the first one really good, but I don't know if I could. I think today it's an increasingly relevant book, Byzantium Endures, I'd like to go back to that and give it a shot. Okay, Michael Moorcock, thank you so much for all these really fun books of yours, and always intelligent, always interesting, always trying new things. And Stephen Andrews at the Outlaw Bookseller. He's an outlaw. He's a masturbator. He's a bookseller, and he's a big Moorcock. He's very knowledgeable on Michael Moorcock. Okay, bye.